Right now, I've got words of wisdom from somebody who examined the 9/11 facts. And I want to take you to that now.
But before I turn things over to David Griffin, let me say a few words about the main sponsor of tonight's talk, Mujkanet, the Muslim Jewish Christian Alliance for 9/11 Truth. That's on the web at mujka.com. That's M-U-J-C-A. I know it's ugly. I apologize and take full responsibility, but it's M-U-J-C-A, Mujka. I don't know what language that sounds like it comes from, but I don't know if I want to learn it. In any case, the Muslim Jewish Christian Alliance for 9/11 Truth wants Jews, Christians, and Muslims, and everybody else who wants the monotheists to stop killing each other, to sit down together and look at the facts of 9/11. Whoever was responsible for that crime, it is clear they intended to sow seeds of hatred and violence between the Abrahamic faith traditions. We aim to put an end to that hatred and violence. It is my pleasure here tonight to welcome a man whose work on process theology, interfaith dialogue, and especially 9/11 Truth represents a truly historic contribution to this cause. Ladies and gentlemen, David Ray Grifftn.
Thank you very much. It's my first time to University of Wisconsin-Madison. I've always heard this is an extraordinary place, but now I see it's like that town in a neighboring state here where everybody is good-looking and far above average. The title of my talk tonight is 9/11 and the American Empire. How should religious people respond? I will begin by unpacking those three terms: 9/11, American Empire, and religious people, starting with the third. Although I am a Christian theologian, I am in this talk addressing religious people in general. I am doing so because I believe that religious people should respond to 9/11 and the American Empire in a particular way because of the moral principles of their religious tradition that are common to all the historic religious traditions. I have in mind principles such as, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's oil. Thou shalt not murder thy neighbors in order to steal their oil. Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbors, accusing them of illicitly harboring weapons of mass destruction in order to justify killing them to steal their oil. This language is, of course, language that we associate with the Abrahamic traditions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. But the same basic ideas can be found in other religious traditions. I turn now to the term American Empire, which has been a highly contentious term. In his 2002 book, American Empire, Andrew Bacevich points out that it was long a cherished American tradition that the United States is not and cannot be an empire. The words American Empire, he adds, were fighting words, so that uttering them was almost a sure sign that one was a left-wing critic of American foreign policy. But as Bacevich also points out, this has all recently changed, so that now even right-wing commentators freely acknowledge the existence of the American Empire. As columnist Charles Krauthammer said in 2002, people are coming out of the closet on the word empire. This new frankness often includes an element of pride, as exemplified by Krauthammer's statement that America is no mere international citizen, but the dominant power in the world, more dominant than any since Rome. Given this consensus about the reality of the American empire, the only remaining matter of debate concerns its nature. The new frankness about the American empire by conservatives is generally accompanied by portrayals of it as benign. Robert Kagan has written of the benevolent empire. Dinesh Souza, after writing in 2002 that America has become an empire, added that happily, it is the most magnanimous imperial power ever. Krauthammer says, the fact that America's claim to being a benign power is not mere self-congratulation, is shown by its track record. Commentators from the left, however, have a radically different view. A recent book by Noam Chomsky is subtitled America's Quest for Global Dominance. Richard Falk has written of the Bush administration's global domination project, which poses the threat, he says, of global fascism. Chalmers Johnson was once a conservative who believed that American foreign policy aimed at promoting freedom and democracy. But he now describes the United States as a military juggernaut intent on world domination. Andrew Bacevich is another conservative who has recently changed his mind. Unlike Johnson, he has not come to identify with the left, but he has come to agree with its assessment of the American empire. He now ridicules the claim that the promotion of peace, democracy, and human rights, and the punishment of evildoers, not the pursuit of self-interest, has defined the essence of American diplomacy. Pointing out that the aim of the U.S. military has been to achieve something approaching omnipotence, Bacevich mocks the idea that such power in America's hands is by definition benign. If the American empire is interpreted in different ways, the same is true, all the more so, for the term 9/11. For those Americans who accept the official interpretation, 9/11 was a surprise attack on the U.S. government and its people by Islamic terrorists. For some Americans, 9/11 has a more complex meaning. This second group, while accepting the official interpretation of the attacks, thinks of 9/11 primarily as an event that was used opportunistically by the Bush administration to extend the American empire. This interpretation is effectively presented by writers such as Noam Chomsky, Rahul Mahajan, and Chalmers Johnson. For a third group of Americans, the name 9/11 connotes an event with a more sinister dimension. These citizens believe that the Bush administration knew the attacks were coming and intentionally let them happen. Although no national poll has been taken to ascertain how many Americans in general hold this view, a Zogby poll in New York surprisingly indicated that almost half of the residents of New York City held that view. According to a fourth view of 9/11, the attacks were not merely foreknown by the Bush administration, they were orchestrated by it. Although thus far no poll has tried to find out how many Americans hold this view, polls in Canada and Germany taken some time back indicated that this view was already held by 15 to 20% of their people. Religious people who take the moral principles of their religious tradition seriously will probably have very different attitudes about the American empire, depending on which of these four views they hold. if they accept the official view, according to which America was the innocent victim of evil terrorists, then it is easy for them to think of America's so-called war on terror as a just war. This is the position taken by Jean Bethke Elshtain, a professor of ethics at the University of Chicago's Divinity School, in a book called Just War Against Terror. From this perspective, the war on terror has nothing to do with imperial designs. It is simply a war to save the world from evil terrorists. The second interpretation of 9/11, according to which the Bush administration cynically exploited the 9/11 attacks to further its imperial plans, has quite different implications. Although it thinks of the attacks as surprise attacks, planned entirely by external enemies of America, it regards these attacks as blowback for injustices perpetrated by U.S. imperialism. This second view typically regards the American response to the attacks of 9/11 as far worse than the attacks themselves. They've already led to hundreds of thousands of deaths. This interpretation of 9/11 would lead people who take their religion's moral principles seriously to support a movement to change U.S. foreign policy. An even stronger reaction would be evoked by the third interpretation, for it entails that the Bush administration allowed thousands of its own citizens to be killed on 9/11, deliberately and cold-bloodedly, for the sake of advancing its imperial interests, and then used this event as an excuse to kill hundreds of thousands of people in other lands, while hypocritically portraying itself as promoting a culture of life. Of course, those who accept the previous interpretation know that hypocrisy with regard to the sanctity of life has long been a feature of official U.S. rhetoric. And yet most Americans, if they learned that their government had deliberately let their own citizens be killed, would surely consider this betrayal qualitatively different. For this would be treason, a betrayal of the oath taken by American political leaders to protect their own citizens. If this third view implies that the Bush administration is guilty of a heinous and even treasonous crime, this is all the more the case with the fourth view. For many Americans, the idea that we are living in a country whose own leaders planned and carried out the attacks of 9/11 is simply too horrible to entertain. Unfortunately, however, there is considerable evidence for this view. And if we find this evidence convincing, the implications for resistance to the U.S. empire building project are radical. As Basovich has emphasized, the only remaining debate about the American empire is whether it is benign. The interpretation of 9/11 is relevant to this debate because it would be very difficult to accept either the third or the fourth interpretation and still consider American imperialism benign. So I now turn to some of the evidence that supports these views. I will look first at evidence that supports at least the third view, according to which U.S. officials had foreknowledge of the attacks. A central aspect of the official story about 9/11 is that the attacks were planned entirely by Al-Qaeda, with no one else knowing the plans. A year after the attacks, FBI Director Robert Mueller said, "To this day, we have found no one in the United States except the actual hijackers who knew of the plot." Since that